Court is in session.
The IMT versus Albert Speer case may begin. The prosecution may now present their opening statements.
Albert Speer is the Nazi mastermind who conspired to economically benefit the illegal German war economy, ordered the violent enslavement of innocent foreign civilians, and subjected them to brutal conditions within his factories. But in addition to that, Albert Speer is a master of disguise. Speer was trained as an architect, and Hitler hired him as the Nazi Party's chief architect. But Speer was eventually promoted to Minister of Armaments and War Production, putting him in charge of all Nazi war production, including enlisting laborers to work in the production factories. Albert Speer paints himself as an innocent architect, thrown into a den of bloodthirsty Nazis by accident. Speer says that his actions as a top Nazi official were entirely forced upon him, tainted by pressure from fellow Nazi gangsters. However, actions are more powerful than words. And Albert Speer's actions as a close confidant to Hitler, the Minister of Armaments and War Production, the chief of the organization Todt, and an instrumental member of the Central Planning Board are simply criminal. Therefore, Albert Speer should be found guilty of conspiracy, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. First off, Albert Speer approved the illegal enslavement of over 5 million foreign civilians, while totally aware of the fact that they were being enslaved by violent force. And this cannot be disputed, as Speer himself admitted to this in document 3720-PS. Speer used the foreign laborers as workers within his war production factories, which means the laborers were working against their home country, which is a war crime. These recruitment manhunts for foreign labor that Speer approved consisted of the destruction of private property, the baseless arrests of civilians, violent beatings to the point of not being physically capable to walk, and murder. Speer now claims that he never supported these methods. But members of the tribunal, don't you think the continuous ordering and approving of enslavement while Speer knew about the brutal enslavement tactics speaks for itself? If Speer truly disapproved, he would have refused to use forced labor, or at least have made a worthwhile attempt of changing these deportation methods. Instead, Speer continued to benefit from the violent enslavements, as shown in documents 016-PS and 3720-PS. He used the enslaved foreign civilians and enslaved prisoners of war as forced labor within his war production factories, which was strictly prohibited by international treaties. In addition, Speer subjected his laborers to grossly unhygienic and overall brutal treatment within his factories. Infectious diseases, excrement covering the bathroom floors, 10 children's toilets for 1,200 people, tuberculosis-infested food are only a few examples of the conditions Speer fostered in his factories. The conditions in Speer's factories have been compared to those within concentration camps, as described in documents 2171-PS and D-288. Furthermore, Albert Speer knowingly violated many international treaties and conventions. He blatantly disregarded strict rules concerning the location and abundance of German war production, and illegally mistreated foreign civilians and prisoners of war. Speer also endorsed the destruction of private property, the use of coercion to enslave civilians, and he failed to support the well-being of his workers. This all violates Articles 159, 160, 165, 168, and 216 of the Treaty of Versailles, Articles 23 and 25 of the Hague Convention, and Articles 25, 29, 30, 31, and 50 of the Geneva Convention. Next, Speer also supported cruel punishments for the workers he considered slackers. Interesting how he thought people weren't working hard enough, given that he was subjecting them to intense physical labor while consuming only 2 tuberculin-infested meals a day. Speer's punishment for these slackers was sending them to concentration camps, where they were murdered by either gas poisoning or injection, as cited in document 2171-PS. And frankly, it is utterly impossible that Albert Speer was not aware of the happenings within concentration camps. Not only was he a very close confidant to Adolf Hitler himself, but he also employed workers from concentration camps within his factories. Specifically, the V-weapon factories, which Speer was responsible for, worked very closely with neighboring concentration camps. Laborers and inmates alike would go back and forth from Speer's armament factory to the concentration camps themselves. How could Speer not know what was happening in concentration camps if the inmates held in the camps were working in his very factories? That makes no sense. Also, Albert Speer conspired to use foreign slave labor to economically benefit the German war industry. And finally, Speer would request foreign slave labor based on race. He preferred Russians because he believed they were the strongest and most capable laborer, yet he also grossly mistreated them. In contrast, he disliked Western laborers, as he thought they were weak. These biases prove that Speer racially stereotyped and illegally made decisions on who he would enslave based on race. In conclusion, Albert Speer caused the deaths of thousands of innocent foreign civilians. First, he ordered astronomical amounts of laborers to be enslaved. We are talking 5 million people. And this number is proved in documents 407-VII-PS, 1291-PS, and R-124. And these recruitment manhunts for laborers left havoc in their wake. Second, Speer fostered despicable conditions within his factories, which led to malnutrition, physical exhaustion, and the rapid spread of infections, all causing a countless number of people to die on his watch. Third, Speer blatantly violated laws put in place by the Treaty of Versailles, the Hague Convention, and the Geneva Convention. Fourth, Speer would send his workers to concentration camps as punishment for slacking off. And again, there's simply no question that Speer was unaware of actions taken within concentration camps, as he worked closely with concentration camp inmates and was an important member of Nazi high command. Fifth, Speer conspired to use foreign slave labor to economically boost the war industry. And finally, Speer persecuted and ordered the enslavement of civilians based on racially driven stereotypes. For these reasons, Albert Speer should be found guilty of conspiracy, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Your Honors, I hope you can look past the lies, manipulation, and false regret that Albert Speer displays, because at his core, he is not a good or an accidental Nazi. Do not accept his plea of deniability. Albert Speer's orders and his personal actions prove that he is just as cruel, heartless, and wicked as his fellow Nazis and should be punished accordingly. Thank you for your time.
The defense may now present their opening statements.
I would like to begin by reminding the honorable justices that defendant Albert Speer was an architect, an artist, and an aristocrat prior to being thrust into a government position. He was by no means a politician, and it was not in his nature to conspire or plan, especially before he found himself in a political role. He additionally is a man of high character and integrity who continually stood up for what he believed in, to the point where Hitler attempted to dismiss him. This was due to Speer's constant objections to policies from moral standpoints. It is for these reasons and more that the tribunal should find defendant Albert Speer to be not guilty of all charges. First, for the charge of conspiracy, Albert Speer is not guilty. Speer did not conspire to rearm Germany, as he was still an architect when the rearmament began in 1933, which was 8 years prior to his appointment as Reichsminister for Armaments and War Production. He additionally was still working as an architect when the war began in 1939. He also did not join the Central Planning Board until 1942, meaning he was not present in any meetings during which such matters were discussed or planned. Furthermore, once Speer joined the government, he was not accustomed to being in a political role and was focused on navigating his new position, not conspiring or planning large projects. As for the question of labor, Fritz Sockel independently conspired to use prisoners of war in the armament industry, to treat those prisoners of war poorly, and to resort to slavery, as he openly mentioned in his labor mobilization plan, which he created in 1942 independently from Speer, and is labeled Document 016 PS. Additionally, Sockel was the one responsible for the illegal deportation of foreign civilians, and he, acting with free will and agency, chose to provide forced labor to Mr. Speer. He also blatantly denied that any of the labor he supplied to Speer was forced for most of the war, as is evidenced by Document 3720 PS. This, presumably, was due to the fact that Speer openly and publicly stated that foreign civilians should not be forcibly deported, especially not through violent measures. I will read to you this quote, which is of high importance as it applies to all of the charges. Speer's quote from Document 3819 PS states, quote, "No violent measures nor large-scale raids may be carried out. One should, rather, proceed with clean methods step by step," end quote. He directly stated this to Sockel. Once Sockel admitted he was supplying vast amounts of forced labor, Speer's power within the government had significantly been diminished by Hitler himself, as can be seen in Speer's pre-trial testimony found in my document book. Secondly, Speer is also not guilty of committing crimes against humanity. Again, Speer was not involved at all in the foreign labor program and is not responsible for the methods through which Sockel acquired foreign labor. However, despite this fact, Speer openly disagreed with the use of force and coercion to acquire foreign laborers, as is seen in the previously mentioned Document 3819 PS. In this document, Speer, in the presence of many other high-ranking officials, including Hitler himself, clearly states that Germany should abide by international laws and use clean methods. As for the conditions of the factories overseen by the Armament and War Production Department as a whole, Germany was a war zone, and many of the camps and factories were, quote, not protected against air raids, end quote, meaning the conditions could be less than ideal. Evidence for this fact can be found in Speer-30, a speech given by Speer, and in Speer's pre-trial testimony. These conditions, however, were equally felt by all the inhabitants of said factories or camps, regardless of race, gender, or religion. Speer was not biased against race in any way. While he did prefer workers from certain areas due to skill level, Speer only encouraged Sockel to attempt to recruit voluntary workers from these areas. He did not order mass forcible deportations, as this was a concept he morally disagreed with, and it was not his job or authority to do so. Finally, Albert Speer is not guilty of committing war crimes. Speer had no involvement in the foreign labor recruitment program. Anything that had to do with foreign labor or labor allocation was within Sockel's jurisdiction. Speer is not responsible for any harsh methods of recruitment or transportation, and he is not responsible for the conditions in which Sockel transported foreign civilians. In fact, as previously mentioned, Speer attempted to order that Sockel use only clean methods to bring in foreign labor. He wanted it to be voluntary, as was promised to him in a meeting of the Central Planning Board. He explicitly stated that Sockel should not use harsh methods or violent measures in the recruitment of foreign civilians. Sokol is also responsible for planning to use and then integrating the use of prisoners of war in the war industries, as he explicitly mentioned in his labor mobilization plan, found in document 016PS. Speer had absolutely no involvement in any matters relating to acquiring labor. He simply used the laborers that Sokol provided to him, laborers who, for most of the war, Sokol claimed were voluntarily working in Germany, as is evidenced by document 3720PS. Again, I want to state that Speer had absolutely nothing to do with foreign labor recruitment or labor allocation. It was not his job. I'm sure throughout the rest of this trial, my colleague on the prosecution will attempt to misrepresent evidence. Many pieces of evidence my counterpart will provide simply do not apply to Speer. I urge the honorable tribunal members to keep a clear, open mind during this trial and to leave their biases at the door. This man is simply not guilty. Speer was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and his only goal was to do right by his beloved country. He joined the Nazis to save Germany, and he continued to supply weapons to the army with the German boys on the front lines in his mind. If it had been up to Speer, there would have been no war, and he would have simply designed a new Germany. This unfortunately did not happen, as Speer was an extremely member of the Reichstag and had virtually no control over the way this history played out. Albert Speer is not the same as the other defendants in this trial, and he should be treated as such. Speer is not a conspirator, he is not a politician, and he is certainly not a criminal. He is, however, a civilized artist and architect who was focused on fortifying what was once a great country, and who instead found himself in a position for which he was not prepared. My defendant feels immense guilt on behalf of his fellow countrymen and cannot articulate the sorrow he feels in regards to the lives lost during this unprecedented tragedy. My defendant wants justice. He wants those who are responsible for the atrocities of the war to experience the proper repercussions. Albert Speer simply does not happen to be one of those warranting individuals. Thank you.
The defendant may now give their statement.
Hello, I'm Albert Speer Jr. I was Hitler's architect, chief of the organization Tod, Reich Minister of Armaments and Munitions, General Plenipotentiary for Armaments within the 4-year plan, chairman of the Armaments Council, and Reichslister. I am not here attempting to justify the unspeakable acts committed by the Nazi Party. I'm here to explain to you who I am and what my job has been for the last 14 years. To better understand how I got to this point, you must understand where everything started. As a young child, I wasn't shown affection from my parents. My mother, a housewife, was always envious of the life her parents gave her. My mother was raised much richer than I was. She was never satisfied with the life my father provided for her. This led to fighting and conflicts in their marriage, which made both of them cold and bitter, which I wasn't immune to. My father, an architect, never cared for me, though I still looked up to him. He was my idol. I used to go to his office to do work for him, to try to impress him, but I doubt he even noticed that I existed. He wanted me to become an architect just like him. I wanted to become a math professor, but I wanted to make him proud of me even more and show that I could change Germany. Hitler and the Nazi Party offered me that position to change Germany, and I took it. When I first heard Hitler speak at his rally in 1930, he inspired me in a time where I felt like all hope was lost. At this time, Germany was going through a mass economic depression, which left many without a home and any necessities. Being an architect wasn't a prestigious career, but I got recognized for my architectural talents by Karl Hanke, who recommended me to Joseph Goebbels to renovate the Berlin National Party headquarters, which led me to be acknowledged by Hitler. Hitler was impressed with my work, which led me to become his architect. Hitler had a unique love for architecture, and I was the instrument used to translate his thoughts into reality. I wanted to see Germany prosper, and I was in the best position to do just that. I wanted to rebuild Germany to the glory it once had, and I was going to redesign all of Berlin into the Führer's vision, but those plans were cut short by World War II. but I saw a new opportunity to come and to continue to help my country in a new way. During the war, my job was the Reich Minister of Armaments and Weapons Manufacturing. I took this job to help save my country and my country's soldiers so that they could get back home to their beloved country. My job was not to capture those who were forced into doing labor. That was Fritz Sockel. Sockel's job as General Plenipotentiary for labor allocation was to collect laborers for these factories, in which he was in collaboration with the higher SS and police Führer to seize and send off the slave laborers. I would like the justices to be aware that I vocally spoke out against the use of forced labor, and instead we needed to use voluntarily labor. Additionally, I advocated that there should not be large-scale raids to secure workers. During the war, the factories were not protected from air raids, so it wasn't always easy to get food for the workers, and why the conditions were less than ideal due to the air raids. I feel immense guilt on behalf of all the Nazis. Those who committed atrocious crimes should be punished, and I seek justice for the victims of the crimes they committed. I am not a politician. I am an architect, artist, and aristocrat who only wanted to change my beloved country for the better. Thank you.
The direct examination may begin.
Mr. Speer, why did you join the Nazi Party?
I joined, as a young child, I was neglected by my father. I always wanted to impress him. The one thing he wanted for me was that I become an architect, and I wanted to make him proud and to change Germany, and the Nazi Party offered that to me. I did not join due to anti-Semitic values.
Mr. Speer, what year did you first step into your role as the Reichsminister of Armaments and War Production?
1942.
And prior to that role, what was your job?
I was Berlin's General Building Inspector.
So when the German rearmament began in 1933, as is mentioned in document 3726 PS, you were still an architect, not working in the war industry.
That is correct, yes.
And you were also still an architect and building inspector when the war began in 1939. Is that correct?
Yes, from 1947 to 1937, from 1934 to 1937, I worked solely in the architecture industry.
Mr. Speer, did you ever order the forcible deportation of foreign civilians? Please answer this with the knowledge that you are under oath.
No, I never officially ordered the forcible deportation of foreign civilians. Sockel took it upon himself to do this, even after I explicitly told him not to.
Did you know that the labor Sockel was providing to you was forced?
For much of the war, I did not know this officially. I did, however, assume and suspect this to be true. Nobody could do anything about this, though. And also, once my suspicion and assumption was officially confirmed, my power had been significantly reduced because Hitler disliked me.
That's a good segue to my next question, which is, could you have prevented Sockel from forcibly deporting civilians?
Actually, I attempted to do this. In document 3819-PS, I told Sockel and Hitler, along with other highly ranking men, that Germany should proceed with clean methods and without using violent measures. Evidently, Sockel did not listen to me. That is all to say that no, I could not. Further evidence of this fact could be found in document 3719-PS, in which Rosenberg also says nothing could be done. It was within Hitler's territory.
Mr. Speer, yes or no, were you involved in any matters regarding the foreign labor program? Some examples of these matters would be deportations, allocation, or methods of transportation.
No, I had absolutely no involvement in such matters.
So anything that happened prior to a laborer's arrival at your factory has absolutely nothing to do with you?
Correct.
Mr. Speer, did you and Hitler get along well?
Towards the beginning of our relationship, yes. He was appreciative of my architecture, and I felt flattered by this. I liked how he wanted to rebuild and revive Germany, my home country. I didn't even realize he was anti-Semitic until later. As time went on, however, when I grew aware of his utter lack of regard for human lives and his lack of conscience, we did not get along. Hitler did not like how I often spoke out on behalf of the other countries and people he had no care for. He even tried to fire me and dismiss me many times, as can be seen in my pretrial testimony in my attorney's document book.
Mr. Speer, could you explain the allegation that you ordered the transfer of a small number of workers to concentration camps as a punishment?
Of course, while I did say that less productive workers might be transferred, presumably to concentration camps, this was not a common occurrence, and it was less of a punishment than an example. I did this for the following two reasons. The war industry was critical at the time, and in order to keep the German boys on the front alive, high rates of production were necessary. Additionally, I assumed that uprooting these workers, an act, might I add, that is not illegal, would entice or motivate other workers to work harder and to be more engaged in their work. I did not know that the state of these concentration camps were at the time, and the conditions of the camp were not part of my decisions to do this at all. In hindsight, I wish I had not sent these workers to those places. Of course, but I had no way of knowing these things at the time.
Mr. Speer, what are your feelings regarding the lives lost during this time?
I risk sounding redundant as I mentioned this topic in my plea, but I feel devastated about the lives lost during this time. Not only that, but I am enraged on behalf of the human race as a whole. If I had known that what this party would do, I would have never joined. This tragedy was not my intention, nor was it within my wildest nightmare. I am ashamed of my previous party, and I urge the tribunal to bring justice upon the defendants in this trial and to have a clear view of who is truly responsible for this tragedy. Thank you for your involvement in this trial.
Thank you.
The cross-examination may now begin.
Mr. Speer, you continued ordering foreign labor even after you knew about the violent recruitment tactics, right?
Yes, I did conclusively know about it, but at that point, Hitler had already attempted to force me to resign and taken away so much of my power. So I had virtually no pull in politics, even
Okay, but you still knew about it. So moving on, using prisoners of war in the war production industry is illegal, as stated in Article 50 of the Geneva Convention. Yet you continue to illegally use prisoners of war labor in the war industry. Isn't that right?
That is right.
Okay. You also used concentration camp inmates as laborers in your factories. Did you ever interact with them or did you ever see them?
I did not see them, though.
You did not see the concentration camp inmates working in your factories?
No, I did not.
Okay, well, actually, I have a picture of you. You're standing right there. That's a concentration camp inmate. That's a concentration camp inmate. You're standing in your factory. So you did see them, as this picture proves, and this is in my document book. So if now that we've proved that you did see them, how could you not know what was going on in concentration camps if you physically saw the concentration camp inmates?
Can you show me which document you're referencing?
Yes, it is the Reich Governor of the Reichsgau Arbeiterjournal. It's the last document in my war crimes section and the last document in my crimes against humanity section in my document ebook. It's there.
Okay.
So can you answer the question, how did you not know what was going on in concentration camps if you saw the concentration camp inmates themselves in your factories?
They did not speak German in any way. I did not interact with the workers, as I was more of an administration and administrative.
The picture shows you standing right next to them.
I have an objection. Is the prosecuting attorney allowed to use evidence that she did not include in her document ebook?
It is in the document ebook. It's actually in there twice. It's in the war crimes and crimes against humanity section.
The images?
Yes, the image.
Objection overruled. Prosecution, please continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, moving on. Does the date October 6th, 1943 mean anything to you?
No,
Okay, do you happen to know where you were on that date?
I do not recall. I was very busy throughout the war.
Okay, so that was the day that Heinrich Himmler gave a speech to Nazi high command in Posen, Poland. And as you classify as a high-ranking Nazi, you probably were at that speech, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, if you were at that speech, then that means you knew about the final solution and using concentration camps to exterminate the Jews, as that's what Himmler was talking about at that meeting. So then that means that, as you also have previously admitted, you sent your workers to concentration camps as punishment. So that means that you were knowingly sending them to their deaths because you just said you were probably at that meeting. Isn't that right, Mr. Speer?
Yes.
Okay, so you just admitted you knowingly sent your workers to their deaths.
Yes, but I wasn't aware that they
Objection, that was a compound statement, and I don't think my defendant understood the question he was answering, as there were multiple parts to it.
Prosecution, you are out of time, so we can just end it there. I will now yield to the justice on the IMT versus Albert Speer case to ask any clarifying questions.
Is there any particular reasoning you recruited Russian POVs differently than others?
there was no specific reason that I hired Russians over any other nationality.
Okay. Can you clarify your reasoning for your break towards Hitler towards the end of the war?
As I begun to see his methods and how he treated humans and humanity as a whole, I began to disagree with how he went about society and how he treated others.
As seen in the prosecution's document 2171 PS, what was your reasoning for underground plants / mines / factories for your workers?
Could you repeat the question?
In document 2171 PS in the prosecution's ebook, it was stated that you had underground factories / plants for your workers. What was your reasoning behind that?
My reasoning for having underground camps was in order to make more art, to produce more weapons for the war.
Okay. Why did you look to improve the conditions for your workers? Was it because you thought you could get more work?
Yes, it was because I wanted to increase the amount of weapons produced to help save the soldiers that were fighting in this war.
Okay, I have no more questions.
If any other justice would like to ask a question, please do so now. As there are no further questions, the prosecution may now present their closing statements.
Thank you, Your Honor. The evidence shows without a doubt that Albert Speer is guilty of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and conspiracy. He approved mass enslavement despite the fact that he knew that violent methods were being taken, fostered disgusting conditions within his factories, and conspired to economically benefit the German war economy. Also, he violated the Treaty of Versailles, the Hague Convention, and the Geneva Conventions. And the excuse that Speer had no power over the deportation methods and that he didn't even know about them because Fritz Sauckel was in charge of deportation and not Speer is simply not true. Speer told Sauckel once in the presence of the Führer himself that Sauckel is involved in the Nazi party solely to work for Speer, and that Sauckel is, quote, Speer's man, cited from document 3721-PS. Additionally, Albert Speer personally approved many of Sauckel's orders concerning recruitments, such as the orders from documents 016-PS, 3010-PS, and 556-13-PS. And the claim that Speer didn't know about the violent recruitment tactics is also just not true. In regards to Sauckel recruiting entire populations, Speer has said, and I quote, "The psychological effect on the population will be a considerable one." This quote proves that Speer not only knew about how dangerous the recruitments were, but he also knew that Sauckel's roundups were so scarring, so brutal, that they left psychological damage on foreign populations. Yet Speer did nothing. Actually, he didn't do nothing. He continued to use this labor and personally benefit from these brutal manhunts. Albert Speer cannot plead plausible deniability on this issue. And just to reiterate, Mr. Speer admitted in the cross-examination that he was knowingly sending his workers to their deaths when he sent them to concentration camps as punishment. And to address the defense's argument, Albert Speer's previous positions as an architect, aristocrat, and artist should not excuse him of the heinous acts he committed as a member of the Nazi Party. And Albert Speer's quote from document 3819-PS suggesting that the Nazis should use, quote, "clean methods during recruitments" means absolutely nothing, as Speer did not do anything to change the recruitment tactics. He did not take action to stop the violence, and I'm sorry, but saying that he doesn't approve is simply not enough and does not excuse him. Also, Speer was not in the wrong place at the wrong time, as Speer chose to be part of the Nazi Party, and he chose to use slave labor, and he chose to send his workers to concentration camps to die. So it is entirely Albert Speer's fault that he is in this situation today, and it is an insult to say that Speer was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Your Honors, Albert Speer cannot hide behind the mask of regret, because at the end of the day, there is solid proof, which I have presented to you, all displaying Speer's guilt. And if feigning regret is all it takes for Speer to get off the hook, then the thousands of people who died because of Speer, those innocent people, they're not getting the justice they deserve. Thank you for your time.
The defense may now present their closing statements.
Honorable members of the tribunal, I will keep this brief. First, thank you for your time and thank you in advance for the careful deliberation I know you will endure regarding this trial. I want to reiterate something that was said at the beginning of this trial. The defendant is innocent until proven guilty. This phrase was said is so critical and ingrained in society that it has become popularized, stripping it of some of its meaning. It means that a defendant holds no responsibility or blame unless the prosecution conclusively proves otherwise. Well, Your Honors, the prosecution did not prove my client guilty. Here's a list of facts. 1. Speer was not in charge of the foreign recruitment, deportation, transportation, or allocation of laborers. The only thing Speer was in charge of was the armament factories and camps. Anything that happened before laborers crossed the threshold of the workplaces had nothing to do with Speer whatsoever, as he mentioned under oath in his pretrial testimony found in my document book. This is a conclusive fact that cannot be disputed. 2. Speer did not approve of and even attempted to end the harsh methods of recruitment used by Sauckel. Though, as I previously mentioned, he had no involvement in it, Speer knew what the right thing to do was, and he did it. In document 3819-PS, Speer clearly states, quote, "All that is needed are stricter orders, but no violent measures nor large-scale raids may be carried out. One should, rather, proceed with clean methods step by step," end quote. Because Speer had no authority in this area, he was ignored by Sauckel. Number 3, Germany was a raging war zone throughout World War II. Speer had no control over such matters, and if facilities or food were destroyed, he had no way of bringing them back. Even if, as the prosecution alleges, food was withheld by from workers, this was due to the rationing that was necessary because of these air raids. Furthermore, Speer was just one man in an entire department of the government, and he was a man who had no previous experience nonetheless. Speer had no way of knowing what the supervisors of the factories ordered or the biases they may have had. This was something he had absolutely no control over, and it would be unjust to punish him for this. Speer also did not conspire. Half the things the prosecution alleges he conspired to do is evidenced to have been Sokol in document 016 PS. Sokol conspired to use prisoners of war in the war industry. Sokol conspired to treat prisoners of war poorly. Sokol conspired to resort to forced labor and deportations, and Sokol conspired to use the SS and police forces to terrorize these foreign civilians. Not only did he conspire to do this, but he alone, without Speer, took the unnecessary initiative to do these things. Furthermore, Sokol conspired to do many of these prior to Speer's role as Minister of Armaments and War Productions, and he presented this plan to Hitler only 2 months after Speer had this role. My final point is that Speer did not get along with Hitler after becoming Minister of Armaments and War Production. Hitler, along with the higher-ups such as Goebbels, even attempted to fire him discreetly, which Speer refused only out of loyalty to Germany. Speer knew that if he accepted this offer, he would be replaced by someone who agreed with the atrocious policies and who wanted to use forced labor and agreed with Sokol about the conditions that laborers should be kept in. Speer was by no means a true Nazi, and after hearing about the atrocities enforced by his former party, he desperately wishes to disassociate himself from them. Speer's a good, dignified, strong moral German. He is a true patriot, and he truly wanted what was best for the German people. He stood up in situations no one else would, and he tried to fight for human decency in rooms where nobody else cared. Please keep all these facts in mind while deliberating this case, and thank you for hearing this today.
The court will now adjourn until tomorrow.